Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of For What It's Nerd. Today, we're here to discuss The Bad Batch and more openly the Star Wars universe at the moment. I haven't been watching much of The Bad Batch, and I think I've made that pretty clear in previous episodes of the podcast, but also in shorts, etc., and so on. The Bad Batch hasn't really gripped me as much as most of the Star Wars media has. But I will admit I caught up the past day or so on I think about 4 episodes of it. I think it was episode 11 to 14. I'm up to date essentially with Tipping Point, the most recent episode, the Crosshair episode. But I think my issue and what I'm still finding with the Bad Batch is that these characters and honestly, the plot is relatively uninspired, and I think that's maybe a bit cruel to say, but it is true. I think these characters are starting to, and I will admit this, starting to feel like less than their stereotypes. Tech, especially, is getting a little bit more of intrigue, especially with his presumed romantic interest in Fee in these more recent episodes, and that's welcoming, and that it feels nice to see a different side to Tech, especially when he has those moments with Omega early in the season as well, when Echo leaves them. So there is stuff happening here, and there is a change, and there is some movement towards characters that feel more singular than part of this clone whole, so to speak. But I still feel like these characters are not these aren't characters that I want to really dig into and feel like I'm learning stuff about. They feel like clones, and clones have been interested in the past, and the idea of how a clone deals with, for example, being decommissioned, etc., is obviously a very interesting part of the Bad Batch as a show. How they deal with being in the Empire, how they deal with all these things. But the clones work better, in my opinion, aside from a few, like Rex and Cody, etc., as a contingent. The idea that the clones are a character as a whole, so to speak, like I said, generally speaking, I think Bad Batch and the Bad Batch, apart from Omega, which is obviously a standalone character, she's different in a sense. They feel relatively they're okay. But they're also stereotypes of like a general a team type vibe. Like there's the character who does this, there's a character who does that, there's a character. It seems it's very I don't know how to describe it. It's very these people are in their lane and they're not really much else than that. And the show addresses that in parts as well. I will admit, in one of the most recent episodes when they first adventure to Pabu, there's a question as to whether are they just soldiers or are they more than soldiers? Can they be more than soldiers? Can they be something else? Which is obviously a very important question for me as a viewer, because I want to see if these characters can become something other than what they were intended to be, as like what their primary purpose was as a character at the beginning of the show slash in their first appearance in the Clone Wars season 7. Yeah, 7. I think that's right. I think, yeah. But so that's kind of my issue on one part. Also, the plot of the Bad Batch is intriguing as a base premise. For example, like I said, the stuff about the clones is very interesting. What happens to the clones after they're decommissioned? Very interesting. I'm loving all that sort of stuff, especially with Ryo Chuchi and seeing her return and seeing her, become part of this essential rebellion. Like a very early vestige of what the rebellion will become. But the cloning stuff now. Don't get me wrong, I find that the way they're going about it interesting. I think there's something going on here. There's obviously other projects that are being worked on cloning wise, as regards the Zillo Beast, for example, that showed up in one of the episodes. And I don't think there's I think there's a potential for something very interesting to happen with that. But it's a weird one because Mandalorian is doing something sort of similar, and now obviously Dave Filoni is working on both shows, or has worked on both shows, should I say. So it's kind of understandable that they would have some overlap if they could, because Star Wars is a connective medium, even though generally most projects in Star Wars do stay within their project, which is a weird one because, it kind of, Star Wars is touted very similar to Marvel in a sense, and I don't think they should be exactly the same. I don't think they need to be exactly the same. But Marvel has this expansive universe in their movies and their shows, and Star Wars has this expansive universe that they generally kind of leave insular at the same time. It's very weird. It feels like the most overlap you get really is in the books, and the canonicity of books these days is becoming eroded by some of the more recent material coming out, which I have spoken about before as not being happy with. But that's beyond the point of what I'm talking about here. Is that if Bad Batch and Mando are going to follow different storylines, I'd like for them to start marrying up slightly. I think that's my issue. It feels like one of these shows' storylines will be inconsequential because they're both building, essentially, this is the idea at least, to Palpatine being able to clone himself after his demise in Return of the Jedi. And obviously, the recreation of Snoke as well. That's the obvious play here as to regards what they're trying to do. Obviously, there might be other characters that come out of this or other storylines that come out of this, like Joris, I always get this name wrong, Joris Saboth or Aborth, one of the two. He was a character in Legends, and a sort of clone of him is created. He's a Jedi, but a clone of him is created. I forget the details exactly, but it links into Thrawn, which again isn't the character that is on the docket, so to speak, going forward for live action. So that could be something that happens in Mandalorian, for example. But if that happens in Mandalorian, then is Bad Batch's plot essentially for nothing, or is it going to link into Mando? It feels like one of the things has to happen for it to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, both are chasing the same storyline for essentially nothing. So that's kind of where I'm at with Bad Batch at the moment. I don't want to be so disparaging with it, but it feels like more than not, what you get with Bad Batch is it's like Clone Wars, but Clone Wars. The thing with Clone Wars is that, and this is why I think some people, might be unaware of how this works, really. I think Bad Batch as a show, it should be more akin to Rebels than it is to Clone Wars in terms of it's dealing with one group of people, generally speaking, apart from one or two episodes. And their plot needs to advance. These characters need to advance. With Clone Wars is an anthology series. And it also works off the premise that we know all these characters. For example, we don't really need loads of character development for Anakin Skywalker because we know where he is and we know where he's going. So you can have a little bit more fun with that. With Rebels and with Bad Batch, you can't really have that because these characters, we don't know them. We don't know where they're going. We don't know what they're doing. We don't necessarily know their quirks to the highest degree. So there needs to be more character work or within these episodes, and I think they're getting there. I do think the beginning of season 2 is very poor, and I do think the middling / moving towards the end of season 2 of Bad Batch is better. I'm just curious as to how long it's going to take before I feel like I could really go, oh my gosh, that's my favorite character in Bad Batch, or oh my gosh, I really love that character in Bad Batch, because frankly, I find them all forgettable. Like, not I know who they are, and I could, like, if someone said, "Oh, if you watch Bad Batch," I'd be like, "Yeah, these characters," and, I could talk about them, but I don't feel like they're not statement piece Star Wars characters, and even new Star Wars, like you have your classical characters, you have your Han Solo, you have your Leia, etc., right? But then even new Star Wars has characters that are like, oh my gosh, these characters are great, like. You need only look so far as, for example, Cal Kestis in Jedi Fallen Order. He's a kind of very standout character now to people. Or even Merrin from the same game. Or, there's other characters who have become standout in new Star Wars media. If you look, for example, at the High Republic books, Elzar Mann is a character that a lot of people actually really like. And, again, Stellan Gios. Or there's plenty of characters in those books that have become staple characters that people are enjoy, and I've seen people who feel that way about Bad Batch characters, but I find it hard to resonate with that because I don't feel like they've got much going on really. They have moments of intrigue and moments of enjoyment and stuff like that. But I think you have to develop character above most other things, and this show seems to like take too long on trips to places to do nothing to set the characters back to where they were at the beginning of the episode. I know that the characters have kind of moved away from the whole working for Sid deal in the show now, but for a while those episodes were essentially, let's start with this fun escapade that goes wrong, we lose out on the money that we were going to get, or the prize that we were going to achieve, and we're back at square one for the next episode. At that point, personally, I mean, don't get me wrong, some of those episodes can be fun, but I don't think you should have, sort of even 3 or 4 episodes in a row that are sort of the same vibe, and that has happened a good bit in this season, where you had a lot of episodes that were kind of just odd jobs. And yeah, Saturday morning cartoons have their place, but I think how do I put it? I think that's, oh gosh, I don't know how to describe this well. I think that's an era of television that is kind of gone, so to speak. I think, Clone Wars aired on actual television. Clone Wars aired, on I think was it Cartoon Network or something like that at the time. I forget exactly, but it aired onto a like a actual network. Did I say network before? I think I did, maybe. But the idea was that would come out and it'd be like that. That's like proper kids viewing, so to speak. You didn't pay any extra for it because it was like the kids channels that you were already paying for and you watched, right? So that's like different. But like, I feel like when generally people are paying for, and maybe I'm missing the mark with this, but when people are paying for Disney Plus, they're paying for the content that you're showing. And I feel like at that point, the content should be something that has content. It has a weight to it on some level. And again, that doesn't mean no filler, quote unquote. I hate using that word, but that doesn't mean a lack of, like a beach episode, if you were to use the anime terminology, so to speak. It's okay to have some episodes that are downtime episodes, or silly, or cute in some way. That's okay, that's fine. But I think the majority should be about advancing narrative. And that doesn't necessarily mean less episodes. I don't think less episodes is more, or less episodes is better. I think episodes should drive something, should be important about something. I feel like these characters that go back and forth on the same issues a lot, that's something that I feel like Clone Wars had a lot better grip on. Like, even when they were doing an episode that was maybe slightly less impactful, like you'd have the kind of the moral of the story, even by that quote at the beginning of each Clone Wars episode, told you, like, this is what this episode's going to be about. This is what this episode is trying to get you to learn, or to feel, or to understand. And yeah, so sometimes those episodes will be relatively like one and done or whatever, but they had a premise, they had a purpose, and there was like stakes because of that. There was some kind of moral to it. I don't feel like Bad Batch has the same level of like not intensity is the wrong word, but I don't think it has the same kind of grip, the same type of kind of intent within its media. And I hope that kind of is rectified in the next few episodes, but I feel like most of this season has been dedicated to meandering, and I don't know if I like meandering in this era of Star Wars, so to speak. And again, not era in the universe, but era as in like the way stories are being told nowadays compared to when Clone Wars was coming out. The Clone Wars model doesn't quite work the same with Bad Batch for all the reasons I've kind of outlined. And I think there should be a kind of recentering on what makes good TV, because I think you can have both. I think you can have a good plot, and I think you can have fun, but I think you can do it in a more concise way, and I don't think Bad Batch is doing that right now, in almost the opposite way to how Marvel struggled with, they did 6 episodes and it felt like sometimes that was too rushed. So like, I think Disney in general needs to look at how they, do shows. They've done them for years in other kind of areas, so to speak. Yes, sometimes more kid style shows, but they have been in the TV sphere for a long time, and I feel like they need to reassess across the board, not just like Lucasfilm, not just but like look at TV and how they approach TV, and hopefully it gets better. I mean, for example, Marvel has at the moment pulled back a lot of its show dates, and I do think this is indicative of the change of TV needs to have a little bit more time put into it to and like intent put into it when making these shows and making these plots happen. Not every show can be a success, but every show can have intention behind it and can have like a worthwhile story within it. And I think Bad Batch is the bad example, is the good example of that bad scenario right now. Opposite to Mandalorian, which is, whilst halfway through its season, feeling like it's really getting to grips with character and dealing with Bo-Katan and what she's doing now and where they're going next, and what's happening with all these characters that are setting up the grand stage for something quite big, I'd say. So I personally believe Bad Batch needs some work still. I think in general, Star Wars and Marvel and Disney in general need to look at their kind of model and how they're dealing with giving content to fans slash watchers slash consumers. But yeah, I'm still not a big fan of the Bad Batch, is what I'm trying to say. I think the storyline is sort of fun, should it pay off in the end. But I think the characters are still as lukewarm, let's say, as when we first met them. That's all I'll say on that. With that, guys, I thank you for listening / watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.